Thanks, Ruth. Really lovely to be here and be able to be speaking with you, giving you a little bit of insight of what I've been up to for the past few years in my research with a few other colleagues. But before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge country. It's important, as we understand, to acknowledge the country that we meet on today, and we're all probably meeting on a wide variety of places within Australia, maybe also outside of Australia. But even outside of Australia, there are still Indigenous mob that their lands are still a sense of their belonging. So I pay my respects to those ancestors that still are here with us today. And I also pay my respects to the country that we are on and the people that belong to that country. Really important. Before we get started, I'd just like to sing in the ancestors, if I could. Amin, ngaramin, ngaramin. Moinem God, moinem God, moinem God. Juanu balad, juanu moro. So what I was singing there was to call the ancestors, a call to ancestors. And for me, it's a really important thing to acknowledge the spirit. And this is something that I will touch on over the next 45 minutes, is the importance of spirit. And interestingly enough, we all in some form or way work with words. We're involved in words, whether it's the text, whether it's the audio, whether it's the spoken. And sometimes I think we often find ourselves very lost in all of those words. So I just want to keep that put that first premise right there in, people's minds, is to consider the spirit and the vibrations that we create when we speak with each other, and how we speak with each other and what we say. Even though they may be words, there is, like I said, a vibration that comes from the way we speak with each other, and gives us a good indication of what we truly mean and what we're truly feeling. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about I suppose a project that I've been very fortunate to be a part of, an ARC project called Reimagining the Arts through First Nations or Indigenous Creative Arts, reimagining the humanities through First Nations Creative Arts. And it's a wonderful project involving 7 amazing women, 6 other amazing women, all First Nations except for one Pacifica sister, and all academics and all amazing artists in their own right. Excuse me. It's something on a scale that I don't know has happened before. And so we're really looking forward to creating and discussing and gathering and meeting and sharing our ideas of what reimagining the humanities could look like. And I wanted to bring this to the decolonizing the linguistic space, because I believe that's where you possibly are heading, and understanding that, this idea of decolonization is an ongoing process and practice, and where it stems from. A lot of people think, that decolonizing is an Aboriginal practice. However, it's not. Although it in some cases can support Aboriginal people, but it's not from our law, it's not from who we are. And for those who don't understand or not sure of what decolonising is, I have this great little book, and it's written by Dane Kennedy, and I'm just going to pop it up there. And it's called Decolonisation. Whoops, wrong way. A very short introduction. And these little books, they're wonderful because they pack a lot of information into them. And as we start this conversation around the reimagining of humanities, the reimagining of linguistics, of the arts, of the Faculty of Arts there at Melbourne University, and all of the the disciplines that lie within the Faculty of Arts, within humanities, how we can understand what that term actually means, and how we're going to use it. So I just wanted to read just quickly a little bit before I go into the paper of Reimagining the Humanities. And this is some of the work, again, from this particular little book written by Dane Kennedy in 2016. And he notes that the United Nations, first of all, was founded in 1945. And many of the states that were formed after the downfall of the European imperial regimes happened through the building of the United Nations. And they are the very product of the historical shift from a world of colonial empires to a world of nation states. Now, the remaining empires, as we know, still want to push us around and still want to, control things. But within the United Nations establishment, one of the main things for me to look at and to acknowledge was one of the 1960 resolutions, number 1514. And this was a resolution that basically said that empires and countries, or empires specifically, had to oblige a sense of communication and relationship with the nation states that had been evolved. This resolution denounced colonialism as a serious, quote, as a serious abuse of human rights, and declared self-determination as, quote, legally binding. Now, I start that from that point so we understand that through the United Nations back in the 40s, 1945, I think that was when my mum was born, no, just a year before my dad was born, that this idea was starting to circulate. It also, within the book, in this wonderful little short introduction, Kennedy notes that the term colonisation was coined by a French journalist who publicly objected to France's conquest of Algeria in the early 19th century. And then it disappeared for about a century, and then it returned through and made popular through a Jewish social scientist named Moritz Julius Bonn in the 30s. Kennedy further states that the term remained unused until the 1960s, when the resolution came about. Now, that idea of decolonisation, again, I want to make the distinction. I'm just making the distinction here between what some people think in regards to decolonisation often is misleading and can bring about some confusion. I have a site here that I was looking at the other day, and I just Googled what is decolonisation in Australia. And the definition that came up was, decolonisation occurs when Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal people reverse impacts of colonisation. Interestingly, that they put Aboriginal people right up the front of decolonising. again, we have to make that distinction that it's not necessarily our practice. However, we can utilize this practice to further our story, further our plight, what is important to us. Excuse me, I'm just going to turn this phone off. It's just distracting me. There we go. Now, keeping that in mind, I want to just have a bit of a yarn to you. Like I said, what I've been doing probably over the last 10 years or so of my academic career, starting with my master's and starting at the RMIT with the Koori cohort. And I'm just going to read a little bit from a section that I've created here. So over the past 2 to 3 decades, we know that there's been a real growing interest in the application of the arts across sectors such as business and education, both on local and global scales. It's leaders within these sectors are interested in exploring new, sustainable and innovative ways to operate. Back in 2008, I was very blessed to go over to Banff, Canada, and with a delegation of master's students, doctoral candidates and researchers from RMIT. And we participated in a wonderful conference called Creative Cross-Cultural Exchange that saw academics, artists, researchers, community and business leaders coming together to engage in arts-based leadership. And this was auspiced by the University of Essex. The delegation presented several performances and presentations based in deep listening as a community building practice. The delegation were members of the Koori cohort, which I mentioned before. And basically we were a mob that come together and we were both black and white, men and women, and all for the purpose of coming together to discuss and to support each other through our masters and, our scholarship. And we were brought together by the wonderful Dr. Laura Brearley, I think it's now Professor Laura Brearley, to share our experiences, our cultural knowledge, and our scholarship on deep listening. Now, deep listening, Dr. Brearley explains, brings the postmodern principles of multiple ways of knowing, and that's through and the culturally inclusive practices articulated by First Nations researchers. And there's a whole list of academics here: Knowles and Co, Knowles and Promislo, Gypsum and Paley, Richardson, Denson and Lincoln, and Tierney and Lincoln and Denson. It also goes on to look at some of the other academics: King, Archibald, Smith, Bishop, Benham, Jesus, Sepharday, Hall, and Rosenberg. Known by many different terms within First Nations languages, Dr. Brearley further explains that deep listening involves taking the time to develop relationships and to listen respectfully and responsibly. Listen respectfully and responsibly. We can talk about these terms again. These are words. What does that actually mean for people to listen respectfully and responsibly? And that again is from Brearley and Atkinson, Professor Judy Atkinson. When we use again these words of respect, responsibility, reciprocity, they can sometimes get again lost in the words themselves when they're just words, when we're just speaking them. But what both Judy Atkinson and Laura Brearley are asking is for people to act, is for people to make action, to make sound, to make action, and to create respectful and responsible listening techniques. First Nations elder Miriam Rose Ungamur describes the practice of deep listening as tadiri, which is the deep inner spring within us. Ungamur further explains that in our Aboriginal way, we learn to listen from our earliest days. We could not live good and useful lives unless we listened. This was the normal way for us to learn, not by asking questions. We learned by watching and listening, waiting, and then acting. Our people have passed on this way of listening for over 40,000 years. In my languages, I say Gupna Ngawun in Yora Yora and Nyanala in Jajawaran. However, they are the same principle and practice, and as Elder Miriam Rose is speaking about. The deep listening is a First Nations practice of listening with the whole body and spirit, taking note of your intuition by listening to your gut. So when someone's speaking to you, and something just doesn't sit right, something doesn't feel good, that's your gut telling you. The words may be saying one thing, but the intention of that person is saying another. So listening to your instinct and being conscious of your surroundings and the impact that you have on the space around you. It frames First Nations ontological understandings of who we are and how we exist in the world. It underpins an earth-centric ideology and Indigenous creative arts praxis. Deep listening is an inclusive practice that transcends the boundaries of disciplines, genres, and cultures. And that's also from Brearley. So the conference in Banff brought together a global audience curious to discuss and see at firsthand the application and possibilities of arts-based practice in action. Among the outputs of the conference, there were discussion papers, articles, performances, recordings, and films. It was a moving experience as a contributor and an observer, making friendships and connections that continue today. However, most prevalent evidence was the sharing of First Nations cultural practices and knowledge that would change the mindset of how business does business and education does education within the perspective of Western society. The arts within the context of First Nations cultures have long been locations of intellectual discussions, expression, education, philosophical discoveries, spiritual connections, and awakenings. In a First Nations worldview, the arts are more than entertainment and distraction. So jumping forward now to this year, I joined a research team of 7 First Nations women, all scholars and all creative arts practitioners, to research reimagining the humanities through First Nations creative arts practices. And I'll just quickly mention their names. I won't go through their whole CVs or their bios. Our ANU professor and Banaba Tabitua woman Katarina Tewa, Naranga Dr. Natalie Hartkin, Yirinjib Mbarbam Faye Roses Blanche, Murning woman Ali Baker, Professor Ali Baker, and Yangon Professor and Pro Vice Chancellor First Nations at Flinders University, Simone Tur, and my partner in crime, Dr. Romaine Morton, Gormpo Yagara Banjalang Minjabu. And we come together to create a group that will foster and workshop and facilitate areas of praxis that can inform interdisciplinary spaces across the humanities, like social science, linguistics, cultural studies, arts, history, sociology, etc. So Reimagining Humanities engages in innovative mixes of methods to advance knowledge and build capacity in scholarship, methodologies, and praxis across the disciplines previously mentioned. It's about creating opportunities for filmmaking, singing, song composition, dancing, visual arts, and weaving, as well as academic theorizing, yarning circles, and storytelling, all the while centering and engaging with First Nations protocols and methodologies of being on country, with local First Nations communities and creative engagement with research and learning associated cultural activities. The reimagining is a process of theorizing collectivity, and that's from Baker and Tur, and collective arts-based methods grounded within First Nations epistemologies, ethics, and methodologies. Such intergenerational relationality and knowing underpins central ideas of First Nations collectivity. And this collectivity is understood as a strength to effectively engage with and respond to knowledge generated in institutional sites of colonial trauma in ways that are focused, innovative, healing, and transformative. Theorizing collectivity, informed by First Nations ways of knowing, being, and doing, and a sense of belonging, is also derived from an ontological relationship to country, and that's Morton Robinson in 2017, and ideas of locationality, positionality, and situating knowledges. That's Haraway and Morton and Robinson and Warby et al. From 2014. It is the process by paying attention to the importance of forming First Nations collectives and critical communities to build intergenerational knowledge about decol and from a First Nations lived experience, and by building First Nations scholarly and artistic capacity through yarning and presenting scholarship about issues of priority for our communities, which enable critical analysis of contested and problematic representations and reimagined futures. And through facilitating broader public symposiums with First Nations and non-First Nations people, and engaging with what it means to decolonize and reimagine colonial institutions through First Nations creative praxis, that draws from decolonizing scholarship. Reimagining is process being the product, or process maybe before the product. It is relational accountability and maintaining strong, healthy relationships with each other and the natural worlds around us, not to forget the natural world around us, not just to isolate humans as the superior, because we're not. In a worldview, in a First Nations worldview, we are custodians and we are part of the whole beautiful system. It is allowing stories their own agency, their own timeline or time cycle, and their own breath. It is also centering and practicing the law of the country. So I see reimagining the humanities as a process that offers a range of ways of knowing and thinking, learning, teaching, and creating, and as an ongoing process, ever developing to change the status quo when it is no longer serving us. In my research program, I've just finished my budget, not the research, my budget finished in February this year of my program titled Sovereign Language Rematriation Through Song Pedagogy. I explored the possibilities of arts praxis or arts practice and First Nations creative arts as a means by which First Nations languages could be reinvigorated into songs written by and for First Nations communities who are addressing the removal of their languages and the trauma that comes with that removal. Rematriation, to me, is a practice that contributes to the process of reimagining. Applying these ancient knowledges, often seen as new ways within the academy, is at the very heart of First Nations creative arts practice. Holding country and the laws of country central to all intentions, processes, protocols, and practices. There is no doubt there is an acknowledgement, an acquiescence, and acceptance to First Nations ways of knowing, being, researching, teaching, learning, truth-telling, reporting, and critiquing of what's taking place in society, locally and globally. There must be more than literature available to ponder, unpack, and experience. There must be a true representation of First Nations peoples and diverse cultures and languages, practices, and laws within the colonial institutes we find ourselves. It's important. I will now share with you an example of my work that I've done with one of the groups. So I was very blessed to work with 3 Aboriginal communities, my own Yorta Yorta community, Yuggera community, which is my partner's community, and the Yuin community along the east coast of Australia. I worked with a beautiful choir and community members. They called themselves the Jinima Yilla choir, which means making happy, making good. And so they wanted to have something positive to call themselves. And so they, in 2020, when I met up with them, they decided we've got to put a Durga language name to what we are and what we do. And through the process of coming out of a major fire in that region, it was important for the women and a couple of men and children to express themselves through song. So Jinima Yilla started as a community choir who sang mainly around the kitchen table, mainly in their homes or, around the campfire at barbecues. And the repertoire was based around Koori classics, around, songs like From the Titters and from Kev Carmody, Joey Gaia, and they tried to focus on some of the language songs that we shared. When we first started, the first what I called intensive, I travelled to Narooma up on the south coast, and we met for a week and we wrote 4 songs in the Durga language. We tried to keep them fairly simple and allowed the participants to set the pace, set the tone, and set the theme of the songs. So the little clip that we're going to see, I think, is about a 1.5 minute little clip. I'll just give you a little bit of background on this one. It is just on YouTube, and it's called Taking Durga Language to the Desert. The group over the 3 years, have worked extremely hard and have been so committed and passionate about their singing and their language and their performance. They've had a major festival come on board and support them, and that's the Four Winds Festival just outside of Bermagui. And through my work, through the budget of Westpac Fellowship, and of course through Museum in Canberra or the National Museum, but also the Four Winds Festival, we were able to work with the group for 3 years to get them stage ready, to even record. We've now recorded their first album, soon to be released. They've got 25 Durga songs. Many of those songs, I have set the melody and the tempo. However, now they're writing by themselves. They're like, Auntie Lou, don't need you now. You can go away and we'll continue on. And that is the whole process. That's the important part of passing the knowledge to the communities to go, right, you're right now, you got to go and do it yourself. So this particular piece that you're going to hear is called Wallawani, which basically means safe travels, but they use it as a welcome. Wallawani is their way of welcoming family, but also sending you on your way with a safe spirit. So if you can play that for us now, Sasha, that would be wonderful.
Sure, let me just share my screen.
Yella Choir is an intergenerational choir established in 2019 and led by renowned Wabunja artist Cheryl Davison. Yella performs song in Duriga language. Language comes from country, an authentic and living part of our culture. In April 2023, 4 members of Yella Choir travelled to Big Sing in the desert. We've been invited to return and perform at Desert Song in September 2023. This time we want to take the whole choir with us, including the kids, to show them what our culture is, to us and to other people. The funds we raise through this campaign will be used to pay for our travel and accommodation for 17 singers and support crew of Yella. Thank you for supporting us taking our Duriga language to the desert, to sing it loud and proud at Desert Song Festival and connect with communities, choirs and country out there.
So that's just one of the very many outcomes of the Sovereign Language Rematriation project on the South Coast. They have 4 videos that were created with the first 4 songs that we'd completed in the first intensive. And as I said, since then, they've grown from strength to strength. They've performed live. They've travelled over to Poland. They've gone interstate with shows. They've opened up galleries at the National Museum. They've performed live with myself at the Four Winds Festival and other artists. They've performed for schools. They're sharing their language in the way that they see fit, and that is through song, so that children at primary schools can learn these songs and get a better understanding of how we pass that knowledge on, as I said, through a song pedagogy. It's a real beautiful story, and I've been very proud to be a part of facilitating that idea of it's okay, you don't have to be an academic to understand your language. You don't have to necessarily be a linguist to understand your language. And with their embodied knowledge, which is another part of the rematriation process, is acknowledging embodied knowledge and the knowledge that comes from our old people and comes from how we walk country and how we listen to country, deep listening, all of those elements come together to and the retrieval of that language with, of course, the support of the text that has been left. It's like pulling these strings together to weave, or the grasses together to weave. And I understand that idea now. Now they're not just, gathering the grasses, they're actually weaving the baskets and creating amazing amounts of repertoire that they'll share, and hopefully share this at the end of this year. They'll be their first debut album. I'd like to stop there, say thank you. Thanks for listening. Yeah, we can open it up for questions.